promoter. I always forget to do, mention different things. And I've had this newsletter since I've been here, but I finally bringing it out. This is just a newsletter of Sandy Soto Spiritual Center, and some of the things I've been talking about, I've mentioned in here about our elders and their passing and how we continue to learn from our people. So if you'd like a copy of that, you can come and see me. And I really appreciate Nigon's teaching on the tobacco tie too. So I've got two. So 2 years. So I really am thankful to be here. I appreciate the hospitality and the mention of folks that are here, and I thought about people that I know that are here, and sometimes you want to mention them, but I do want to honor Howard Jolly, who's with the Christian Missionary Alliance, and they didn't get mentioned this morning, so I just wanted to mention that. And I don't think I heard the Anglicans get mentioned. Maybe they did? Did they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then we won't mention that because. And again, I'm thankful to be living as Haudenosaunee, guest on Anishinaabe territory. So I'm thankful for the welcome that is here for me from that community. Ray Aldred was originally invited to share in this spot, and he was not able to come. And so in honor for Ray Aldred, who is Cree, but he also has some Mohawk heritage, so he's a brother to me. Growing up, I think it was his grandmother, wasn't too terribly proud to be Native because there was lots of discrimination in northern Alberta. And she would always tell Ray and the rest of the kids, we're Scottish. And one of the uncles died, and they went to the funeral, and little Ray was there, and he just saw all these Indians there, and he says, and he would ask others, he says, I wonder when the Scottish people are coming. They didn't show up. And then I also want to honor my good friend Richard Twiss, who passed away about 1.5 years ago now. Richard, in the 90s, beginning in the 90s, said some words that just captured my heart and a lot of people's attention. He talked about in a conference, he would be speaking and he would do a very Native thing. It wasn't all laid out and it wasn't all quoted and footnoted, but it was just coming from his heart. And he says, I can hear a sound. And Richard and I and others grew up in a very middle class, conservative kind of evangelical heritage. And we didn't play Native drums in the church. And Richard says, I can hear a sound. And it's an indigenous sound of those who know Christ and that are following him. There's this sound of worship, and there's an indigenous sound. And one day we were in Warm Springs Reservation in Oregon. We were there with Maori people and folks from the U.S. and a couple of us from Canada. And we were discussing indigenous issues and following Christ. And Richard had talked again about that sound that he heard. which triggered Bruno, Garland Bruno, who was a leader from that territory, from that area. And his wife had a drum out in a car. And Richard's wife, who was Scandinavian, she went out with Garland's wife, and they returned to the circle with drums and handed it to Richard and handed it to Garland. And they'd never done this before in a Christian setting. And then they began to play and then just sing from their heart. And people got up and they began to dance. And for the first time in my experience, and with these other folks too, and with the Maori, we began to dance. And it began us on a journey. It was early 90s of embracing who we are as Indigenous people. And I remember that. So I wanted to mention him in honor today. And then there was the World Christian Gathering of Indigenous People in 1997 or 6 or 8, I'm not sure exactly when that happened, in Rapid City, South Dakota. And Indigenous people from around the world came. And we came to celebrate our Indigenous ways and life as followers of Christ. And I remember going to that meeting. See, when I grew up, all of my life, my dad was a faith keeper of the Handsome Lake Longhouse. And whenever we were in the Longhouse and we joined the dances, my dad never danced. But he always walked together with everybody. He would always enter, and I would always enter and follow him. But here we are at the Rapid City, and we have a grand entry for the gathering. And there's hundreds of us as Native people from all over the world. And so we came into the powwow drum, and all the people came, and I was dancing along, and I had my second son and my second daughter with me. And my little daughter was just maybe 3 years old or so, and my son was about 5. And we came dancing in. And I turn around and I see my dad coming in with my mother, and my dad's dancing. For the first time, he's a traditionalist, he's a faith keeper, and he's gone to the Longhouse all of his life. And the first time I see him dancing, it's coming to the World Christian Gathering of Indigenous People. And you know, the Bible talks about the tabernacle of David in reference to the Christian message, the gospel message going out to the Gentiles. And the tabernacle of David was not the same as the tabernacle of Moses. The tabernacle of Moses was set up in such a way that it was ultimately like the temple that was to be built in Jerusalem. It had the entranceway, it had the holy place, it had the place where they had the showbread and the various articles there, the laver, etc. And then there was the Holy of Holies. And there was restricted access. And eventually, only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies. And they tied a rope around his leg, and on his regalia, he had bells. That as long as he was moving, you could hear those bells. But if he went into the Holy of Holies and things weren't right or whatever, and he was struck dead, then they wouldn't hear the bells any longer. And they had that rope. Nobody wanted to go in there and risk their life. They just pulled him out of the Holy of Holies. So the teaching there was that God is powerful. And like with any kind of power, you have to be very careful in your approach to it. You could be destroyed by that very big power. But the tabernacle of David was different. It was after they had recaptured the Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant away, and they recaptured it and brought it back to Israel. And David set up a tent, and they had the Holy of Holies, or they had the Ark of the Covenant there. And it was 24 hours, 7 days a week worship. They just sang and worshiped. But there was no approach process there. It was just the presence of God and the meeting place of God. And when I thought about this World Christian Gathering, I could see a great big tent, a huge tent. And actually somebody gave a prophecy in this area that there was a big tent over the Black Hills where the gathering was held, and that the wires that were holding the tent up were staked into all of the reservations all around the Black Hills. The Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Crow, and I believe it was the either Arapaho or Southern Cheyenne, but there were several around the Black Hills. And that sound that Richard talked about, and the sound that I heard was the drum. That sound. And you know, as far as the Lakota are concerned, the Black Hills are the center of the universe. I also know another center of the universe. It's in Arizona. It's on the third mesa of the Hopi. It's a village there called Oribe. It's the village that has been continuously inhabited from about 1100 AD. So it's known as the oldest continuously inhabited place in North America, in that Oribe village. And it means center of the universe. And you know, for indigenous people, the heart of our place is the heart of the universe. I heard this past week at the National Aboriginal Spiritual Gathering of the United Church, somebody got up and said that the word for creator meant heart of the land, heart of the universe. And there's just something about that place of understanding where your being comes from. And I live as guest on Anishinaabe land, but the heart of the universe is Cayuga Lake in New York State. For me. I drove there one day. I worked for the Wesleyans at that time, and I went to Houghton College, which is in the New York State, south of Buffalo, and so I did a presentation there. But then I drove all the way around Cayuga Lake, and when I went there, my heart, my soul, my body reverberated with that land. And that's where I understood that my ancestors were buried there, and the very molecules of their being had come up in the grass and into the trees and into the animals and had recycled and gone into the earth again. And I resonated with that land because that's the center of the universe for me. And I'm really thankful for this earth. I read theoretical physics, in my spare time. Stephen Hawking and Smolin, all those theoretical physicists. I have Einstein's original work on theory of relativity, general relativity. And actually I understand what he was saying better than the people who tried to tell me what he was saying. I followed along his argument a little bit closer. But Stephen Hawking tells this as an introduction to his book on theory of everything, or a brief history of time, just talking about a summary of physics up until that time. And he talks about this physicist whose giving a lecture, and then a question and answer time comes. And this lady begins to talk about, you've talked about particle physics, the Big Bang and all of that. The Earth is, this is Turtle Island. It's on the turtle. So the physicist argues back with the lady, says, well, what's under the turtle? And then the lady says, another turtle. And then he says, well, what's under that turtle? Another turtle. And then he says, well, what was under that turtle? Another turtle. And they keep going on, and then finally he gets off, and she's getting annoyed, and says, what's under that turtle? And she answers back, it's turtles all the way down. And Stephen Hawking tells that story in order to poo-poo the idea of a turtle. And it's a put-down of what they would refer as folklore or whatever. But in reading theoretical physics, when they talk about the smallest elements and the very smallest particles, and they get into quantum theory. Now, Einstein talks about the big picture and how the universe works in a big way. Quantum physics looks at the most minute elements. And in the two theories, they function with two different kinds of foundations. You can't put the theory of general relativity together with quantum physics. They don't match. Like, it's different rules altogether. They don't jive. And they're searching for a theoretical rule that will cover it all. And when they talk about in quantum physics, you can never tell what's going to happen with any particle at any time. In fact, you don't even know where it is. It could be anywhere, and then when you finally are able to observe it, then it's there. But it could have been anywhere else. And you don't know exactly where it's ever going to go either from that moment. And the quantum physicists are beginning to speak in terms of metaphor. And I read one person talking about, we don't know what that particle will choose. They begin to speak of particles having will. At that very, 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 very most elemental place, that there's will. We don't know, just like with a human, we don't know whether you go this way or that way. We don't know which way the particle will choose to go. And I think about it, and I think at the very, very most elemental place in the universe is like a turtle. You don't know exactly which way it's going to go, this way or that way. And so that's as good and valid a description. It's turtles all the way down, as it is the modern physicist that's talking about elemental particles. When Aboriginal people meet, there's two questions we ask each other. The first question we ask is, where are you from? And if an Aboriginal person has been born on a reservation in a native community, and they may be currently living in this city, generally speaking, that Aboriginal person says, I'm from Sagin. I live in Winnipeg, but I'm from Sagin. So when people ask me where I'm from, I say I'm from Six Nations, but I live in Oakbank. Because I am so oriented and connected to that territory that that's where I'm from. And it's always my reference point. The second question that Aboriginal people ask, who are your relatives? And I've asked those questions, and I can be in Alberta and find a connection back to Six Nations. Because we start talking about the families, and suddenly, okay, this person's aunt or uncle is from Six Nations, or Ray Aldridge's folks are Mohawk. We find these connections. And I studied with the Lutherans. Oh, that was hard. The rest of you are hard, but they were really hard. Because the Lutherans do their ministry training from the creeds. That's their reference point, and they deal with the creeds. And the creeds are from a Greek worldview. It comes out of the questions that Greek people bring to the scriptures. And so they had huge arguments. And they started to fight physically with each other based on the difference between hypostasis and hypo something or other. I was in Bible school and I learned that. I remembered hypostasis. But then there was this other hypo something and I couldn't. But they had a huge argument. And they would argue about, is it hypostasis or hypo whatever. And then they would get arguing and fighting and physically get into fisticuffs and start condemning each other, and they split the church over a word like that. And it was an abstract word. And if you look at the creeds, they're all about abstract ideas. Omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotent. All powerful, all knowing, all present, everywhere. Very philosophical ideas. And I thought, if we had an Aboriginal creed, our Aboriginal creed would contain in it geography. Where was Jesus from? Where was his parents from? Nazareth? Where was that? Near the Sea of Galilee. Where? On the southwest corner. By a valley there, close to Megiddo, in that territory. Where was Jesus born? In Bethlehem. Which meant they had to travel down the Jordan Valley and up the road from Jericho up to Jerusalem. And then when they got to Jerusalem, they had to turn left and go south a few kilometers down a valley and to the little village of Bethlehem, the city of David. And that after he was born, Herod tried to kill him, and so his family went off into Egypt. And then he came back from Egypt after 12 years and went back to the Nazareth territory again. And when he was at 12 years old, he came into Jerusalem. He was, this was bar mitzvah time, the recognition of puberty ceremony. And he was with his family and a whole bunch of people that came down to Jerusalem. And his parents left without him. Why? Because it's like a native society. Everybody that age is your parents. So you've got parents. They didn't leave him. He was with the group. They suddenly realized, after going a while, that they didn't have him around, so they headed back and found him in the temple, which was in, the middle of the city and the temple precincts and etc. And the geography would be in our creed. There's no geography in the creed, not the Western creed, because you don't care about geography. You're dominating it. That's why you don't care about it. If you had a relationship with it, you might treat it differently. But since you don't have a relationship with it, you can do whatever you want with it. And you can steal it from native people too, and it's just like, no big deal. That's what abstract creeds do. They make you abstract and strange. To us especially. Six Nations say, oh, it's gone. It's kind of an expression of like, others, Agi. And then the other thing that the creed would have is genealogy. When non-native people read the Bible, they're going along pretty good for Genesis and Exodus, but as soon as they hit Numbers and Leviticus and they get into genealogy, so you see all, I pastored for almost 20 years, so I can tell when you go to sleep. I can tell how deeply you go to sleep. I can tell you how long you went to sleep. Oh, brother, you just ministered peace to me so much. Or I like this one better. So we would have genealogy in it. There's two genealogical passages in the New Testament. Genealogy matters. Matthew 1 and Luke 3. And they're two different genealogies. There's a genealogy through Joseph, back to David, back to Abram. Then there's a genealogy through Mary, back to the son of David through another line. Solomon is on the other side, but they come through Nathan, back to David, back to Abram, and right back to Adam. Amen. Two different genealogies. And in the genealogy of Matthew, what's so significant about the genealogy of Matthew, of the Jewish men, is all these women that are in there, who are the prophetic witness against patriarchal abuse. Which means you shouldn't have a patriarchal organization with men all in charge, running the whole show, and driving us into the ditch. And our Aboriginal creed would be a story. And it would be a dance. It would be a celebration, and it would take days to go through the creed, and we'd be dancing all along, and we'd be eating together. And you know, the Lord's Supper was a great big banquet with a little bit of wine and bread at the end of the meal. You Western folks and your desire to reduce it down to the essential, timeless, eternal truth, you got down to that very little thing is, what's the least that we can do to actually connect to this story? Because we don't want to eat with each other. We don't want to be with one another and eat their food. So let's just reduce it down to this little cracker. And this little wee, So we had communion at Six Nations with the Mennonites there, and talking about the land claim issue. And we had our fruit of the vine was strawberry. And it's associated with forgiveness too. And then we had cornbread, which has no leaven in it. And it's heavy. And we enjoyed a good time with them. They still talk about it. I wish we could have continued with that. I want to close with a couple of quotes. We've been talking about the sound in the land, and this is a quote from a Twitter article that was notified to me. And they said, there are electromagnetic waves that pulsate at the same wavelength as the sound waves we can hear in space. Like, the popular thing is space, there's no sound, you can't hear a scream. But there are actual electromagnetic waves emanating from all of the planets and Earth, etc. And they're actually at wavelengths that we could hear. that if we could translate it into that as a sound that we are able to perceive here, those sounds in space are the sounds of the universe. And I listen to them. I listen to the earth. I listen to the sound of the earth. I listen to Mars. I listen to Venus. I listen to Neptune. I heard those sounds. They've got a little clip and they play it. And in this article, there's another article that talked about this age in which we live right now, the age of man. They're beginning to think about how many animals are disappearing. You know, on Twitter they show big game hunters killing rhinoceros and giraffes and lions and tigers and grizzlies and wolves, and you know, it's just horrible pictures to me. And this article says, overall, of the world's more than 71,000 species, 30% of them are threatened, according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Based on this assessment, and without drastic economic and political measures to address the current die-off, the sixth mass extinction could be cemented by 2400 AD. That's just about 7 generations away, 7 long generations away. And they're beginning to name this time as an epoch. And they're coming up with this phrase now, Anthropocene, which is human, defaunation. The descriptor is the denuding of the earth of plants and animals. And when I was, I'm glad that Rick Martin is here today too. Good friend of mine. And we went to his church. Well, it's a Mennonite church, and Rick doesn't claim Mennonite. So that, you know, that this statement's distanced from him. So you know, I just want you to let you know. Rick's right there. And there was this older Mennonite man, white-haired man. I came there to talk about the Six Nations land claim issue. But before the service, he was talking, and he said, when we came to this land, we made something out of this useless land. I didn't say anything right then. But I thought to myself, this useless home to creatures, this useless home to my relatives, this useless diversity, this useless forest of oxygen makers, this useless filter of water, this useless place of production of medicines and fruits and help to humans. And there was a big pride to cut down the trees and to plow the ground and plant seeds and grow crops. And in stepping back to it and looking at this bigger picture, the Anthropocene defaunation. We could also say Anthropocene defloration. Flora, too. And maybe that wasn't, you know, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Maybe we should have thought differently about it. Maybe we should have figured out how to do it otherwise. And maybe right now we should reject monoculture, agriculture. Maybe right now we ought to step back, scale back, My parents grew up on, or my mother grew up on a 10-acre piece of land. There were 11 people that were provided from that piece of land. That land's still there. They had their own provision from that land. It's still there. It could still supply. We've just forgotten how to do it because the system's making us do something else, and it's all driven by money. Maybe we need to repent.
We can sing a sacred hymn.